All right, y'all. Welcome to another episode of Medicine Mondays. I'm your truly, your gracious host, Dr. Pierre, your favorite board certified internist, host of Medicine Mondays, host of The Real Physician Reacts, as well as the Lunch and Learn with Dr. Barry. And this week we are here to talk about a new subvariant, stealth variant that may be making some waves here in the near future, but we're hoping and we'll just kind of give you an update on what's going on. So the way I like to do our COVID related shows, we'll give an update, we'll give out the numbers just in case you're aware, or you can almost be able to kind of time stamp yourself depending on obviously when this is recorded versus when you actually get to watch this to kind of figure out how we are doing as far as COVID cases and deaths, right? So again, if you have not caught any of our previous episodes, we don't do much in-depth talking about what COVID-19 is and whatnot. I will put a link in description to kind of talk about what that aspect is. This is more assuming that you're all cut up to speed and we're just kind of getting a refresher course, right? So let's talk about some updates as far as what are we doing as far as cases, deaths. Obviously, I like to break down here in the United States as well as worldwide, just so you can kind of get an idea. If you're not realizing it, the U.S. is number one on both fronts as far as cases and deaths. So let's kind of give a little break there. So at this moment of time of recording, the U.S. has 79.7 million cases with about 972,000 deaths. Right, we are likely going to cross the 1 million death mark probably by summertime, if I had to guess, especially if, this conversation we're going to have today comes into fruition and turns out a lot worse than we're expecting. Worldwide, there's 472 million total cases of COVID-19 with about 6.09 million deaths, right? Again, that's in a span of about 2.5 plus years. Over 6 million died. Again, 972 here in the United States, right? So just very unfortunate with, what COVID has done. But we are, I dare to say, I almost want to knock on wood. It feels like we're trying to turn the corner, right? When I say we're trying to turn a corner, we're trying to, I guess, free ourselves from this aspect of being in a pandemic. And as a medical professional, public health professional, I say this all the time. I saw someone quoted this online where they said, like, yeah, you can want to be over with your blood pressure, want to be over with your diabetes, or want to be over with your cancer, but that doesn't mean it's actually over. So for a lot of us on this side, we're like, yeah, we hear y'all. Like, of course, yeah, we know y'all want to get back to whatever your normal is going to be, but that may not be the case, right? So we are just getting over the most recent surge with the Omicron variant. And I was hoping that I did not have to have a conversation like this as soon as I did. I was hoping that, the downwind of the Omicron variant, maybe we'd have a few months, 3 or 4 months to kind of be able to take a deep breath before we start talking about new variants that are creeping up worldwide that are likely going to eventually end up here. But here we are, right? So we are going to be talking about the BA.2 variant, better known as the stealth variant. We're going to talk about what that is, why is it called that, and what we need to do to kind of be concerned, especially here in the United States. I know I have a lot of fortunately, I got a lot of people worldwide who watch this, but I know I got a lot of my United States followers who watch me or listen to the podcast. So let's talk about the BA.2 variant. It is a subvariant of the Omicron variant, right? So with the Omicron variant, you can kind of designate that, especially the one that caused, the sheer amount of significant cases across the world, as the BA.1, right? So that was the more dominant variant. Again, late November, that kind of just rampant and ran through, fortunately not causing as much damage as in terms of deaths as the Delta variant, but had numbers, cases kind of shooting through the roof, right? But at that time, it was just BA.1, right? It was the dominant one. And, researchers, they're not sure necessarily when this BA.2 variant first started or where it first started, but they believe that it probably kind of, again, mature together. But because BA.1 was so dominant, and I kind of mentioned this aspect of being a stealth variant, and we talk about why they call it a stealth variant, is because with all variants, there is some type of mutation that occurs, something that changes that makes this variant a little bit more different than that variant. And in this case here, we know with the BA.2 subvariant that the genetic mutation actually made it much difficult to really kind of pinpoint, like, all right, am I dealing with the BA.2 or am I dealing with the Delta or am I dealing with, like, so it made it more difficult to kind of test specifically for that, which is why it was kind of dubbed the BA.2 variant and not really given its own name. Like, you've seen the other big subvariants have come through, and when it's been significant enough, they like, oh yeah, I'm going to give you your own Greek name, right? Whereas here at BA.2, we're still just calling BA.2 because we know we're just kind of recognizing it as a subvariant, aka a little brother of the Omicron variant. So at the time when it first started picking up, or when we first started noticing, because like I said, at the time when we documented, the Omicron variant, aka BA.1, that was like late November, December, early November, late December, because it was so dominant, we weren't even really thinking about the BA.2. But at this time, especially when it started kind of the BA.1, the Omicron variant started dipping down, we started noticing that cases started picking up again in certain parts of the world, Europe, especially Denmark, England, and even Hong Kong. We started seeing a rise in cases. And what we noticed is that the rise in cases weren't due to the BA.1 or the Omicron variant. I'll just call it BA.1 for now. It wasn't really due to the BA.1 ramp it up again. It was like, oh no, now the little brother BA.2 is, come to play. So that's what they saw with kind of the newer cases. And in the month of February in the United States, the Omicron, the BA.1 variant was still the dominant variant, but the BA.2 variant made up of about 8% of cases, right? I want us to remember that number, especially when we start talking a little bit later about kind of what's looking like now here in the month of March, obviously when we're recording this. So again, we talked about it. There really isn't any area of location where we can say like, all right, it definitely came from this part of the country. Obviously, South Africa was a major focus for the BA.1. So we assume that it likely kind of originated from there and just kind of spread like wildfire. And I've kind of mentioned this before, especially here definitely on the podcast, but even certain live streams. In the United States, we are very geocentric with our way of thinking. Like, we think, all right, because we're doing so much better, or everyone's getting, vaccinated, and like, oh, it's all good. Like, the pandemic is over. But unfortunately, because, and I've said this before, understanding that because other countries don't have the resources, don't have the vaccines, don't have the testing, even the response, like, as from a healthcare system to take care of people who are sick. They can't really just kind of brush it off. So yeah, we may be doing good, quote unquote good over here, but if other parts of the world aren't doing as good, eventually it tracks back, which is what happened with Delta, which is what happened with the Omicron, which is likely going to happen with this BA.2 variant. Whereas, like, yeah, they were looking good over there, like here in the United States, but again, unfortunately, because it's a worldwide issue, because the worldwide issue hasn't been taken care of, it eventually kind of tracks this way here. So what do we know, right? Just kind of get an idea. What do we know about this BA.2 variant versus kind of the BA.1, even the Delta, or even the OG, COVID-19? So we know that this one is highly transmissible, even more than the BA.1. And if you've caught some of the recent episodes, again, I will put it in the description so you don't have to like try to, report it to memory. One of the biggest issues with the Omicron variant is that it was more transmissible than the Delta variant, which, again, we know how deadly the Delta variant was. And that was our initial concern. We're like, oh my God, if we get a variant that spreads faster than the Delta variant, but with the same amount of severity, we're already in trouble, but we're going to be in deep, deep, deep trouble. Fortunately for us, with the studies and the numbers, has shown that, yes, the Omicron variant, it spreads faster, it spreads to other people faster, but fortunately for us, it's not as deadly, right? And I think there's a few different factors kind of associated with it being not as deadly. When the biggest one is the fact that our abundance of vaccinations, people being boosted, really was able to help calm some of the significant waves that were occurring with the Omicron variant. So yes, a lot of people were getting diagnosed with the Omicron variant, but they weren't getting deathly ill. I had a podcast episode, I think early March, I believe. Yeah, early March, where I talked about how my whole family, except me for some reason, was diagnosed with COVID, positive for COVID. But essentially we're asymptomatic. Like after, my daughter had like a stomach ache, but essentially asymptomatic for the most part. And it was just more, issues of kind of having to self-isolate and dealing with that. Make sure you check that episode out. I will definitely put it in the description. But here we have this BA.2 variant that's even more transmissible than the BA.1. So I already told you that the Omicron variant was much more highly contagious than the Delta. And now we're having the little brother of the Omicron variant, the BA.2 version, even being more contagious than the first one, right? This spells a world of problems, which is why you're seeing in parts of the world, England, Denmark, Hong Kong, that the cases are back on the rise again. And you're hearing, especially in the Hong Kong area, you're seeing restrictions being replaced because they're taken off because they can't handle the shock. And this is the big issue, is that yes, you can have a lot of, especially, let's say you have a disease that's less severe. Yes, it can be less severe, and that's a good thing that it's less severe. But if it's less severe, but I'm not only am I now able to, before I may only be able to spread it to like 20 people, but if I can spread it to 2,000 people, that means the percentage I get sick, right? If it's 10% of 2,000, right, that's 200 people who can get sick and die, versus if it's only 10% of 20, right, which is only 2. So that's why we have to think about it just in the sheer numbers game, right? So when you see us talk about, how important it is to not only be less severe, but not spread as much, especially when we talk about, like, how do you know we're getting to the end of a pandemic? It's when the variants kind of give us those traits. But when you have a variant that gives us a trait that, like, oh yeah, this is way more contagious than the last one, that is a problem. Because of course, what's going to happen is we're going to have a lot more people who were infected, who are going to get reinfected, or weren't infected before, and now are going to get infected, which happened a lot with the Omicron. Like I talked to a lot of my colleagues, I talked to a lot of my friends and family. They tell me that, like, yeah, like I definitely, I thought I was able to get away from it, but it got me. And again, that's why we say, like, you always protect yourself, always make sure you're vaccinated and boosted, because eventually these things will happen, right? We hope they won't. Right. We hope that you won't get to the point where, you need a significant wave to hit you across the face before you say, like, oh, yeah, I need to take care of myself. Because, again, I'm still taking care of patients in my long-term care facilities who are unvaccinated with COVID, who have trachs and peg. I'm still taking care of those plenty. Like that occurs. So, again, it is not something that we can kind of brush off. And that's what we're seeing here with this BA.2 variant, right? So I talked about the fact that there's already studies in Denmark that talked about the BA.2 variant is almost twice as likely to spread for people who are in close quarters, like who live with you. In Hong Kong, researchers found that the virus doubled every 1.28 days. And we talk about, when it comes to getting sick and being ill, is that the viral load needs to be a certain number, right? So if the viral load is able to double again, almost less than 1.5 days, and while it's doubling, you're able to spread it to much more people much more quickly than you did before, it is a recipe for disaster, right? And one of the issues that they kind of noted, right, when they said, like, hey, what do we need to think about? Like, why is this happening now? And I kind of gave a little introduction, especially here in the United States. Right here in the United States, there are a lot of people. There's a lot of politicians and just regular people who are like ready to like say it's over with. Let's wipe our hands with it. Let's keep it moving. And in doing so, you're seeing relaxation in mask mandates. You're seeing relaxation in testing. Everyone's getting a test at home sent to them. And again, so that's a catch-22, right? Because before, you had an instance where to get tested or, to find if you had COVID, you had to go to like a local pharmacy and get tested, and they would report your positive results. Say, hey, yep, you're positive. This is what you should do. Follow the Department of Health. But now, if I'm sending a lot of these tests home, right? And I find out like, yeah, like I'm sitting at home now. I don't have to worry about necessarily reporting it again to myself. So you're going to get a lot less cases reported because there's a lot less official testing done. Most of the testing is going to be in the comfort of someone's home and then come from there. But like it's far as, being reported, that's going to be a concern that we're going to have to really, really kind of think about, especially when we think about the newer cases that may rise, especially when the BA.2 variant eventually takes over here in the United States, because it always is, right? Like the Delta, same happened where it was happening in India and eventually took over the United States. The Omicron, it was happening in South Africa and England, eventually took over the United States. So if the pattern holds true, which is likely going to hold true, again, I'm not here to scare nobody, but it's likely going to hold true that if the BA.2 variant is taking over Hong Kong, England, Denmark, and those areas over there, it's likely going to take over the United States. But what happens when it takes over, right? Because that's the most important thing. That's why you're either watching the show, listen to it on the podcast, right? What happens if it really causes an issue here? One of the benefits that, again, I kind of mentioned is that here in this country, we've at least have a good job as far as getting treatment options. Our treatment options are definitely there. We have, again, 3 vaccines that are ready to go, 2 of them FDA approved, that are ready to go at a moment's whim for people who want to be tested, people who want to be protected in case of severity. So here in the United States, I want to kind of shoot our numbers here. About 67% of the country is fully vaccinated against COVID-19. About 67% of the country. So, and we talked early in the pandemic, man, if we could just get to 70%, if we could just get to 7%, we would get what we consider herd immunity, and then we can again lessen the blow, decrease the spread. So, and that's why when I see a lot of people now, right, and I see, of course, I'm on social media all the time, right? So I see a lot of people now will jokingly say like, oh, look, all of a sudden, they made y'all get the vaccine and all of a sudden they're pulling their restrictions away. No, like we're getting closer to that 70% that we've been asking for the past 2 years. And now, again, the science is saying, hey, you know what? We may be okay. And what we're seeing now, at least with the BA.2 variant, at least for now, at the time of this recording, is that, yes, it definitely spreads a lot faster than BA.1, for sure. And it's likely going to be the more dominant, variant here in this country. And I kind of mentioned in February is at 8%. When they did their numbers in March, is already up to 22%. So by the time, again, April, May, June, by the time that comes around, it's going to be in the 80s, 90s, which always happened when you had a dominant variant kind of running amok, right? So it will eventually be the dominant strain here. But what we're seeing here and what you're seeing experts kind of recommend is that, hey, you know what? I do not think it's going to be as severe as Delta. Because honestly, when I talk about, especially again, this 2-year span, the amount of people who died and the amount of people we couldn't save during that Delta variant was so disheartening. Like when the patient would go into the hospital and you're just like, oh, especially they end up in the ICU, and you're like, yeah, I don't think this person's going to make it. In your mind, that's what you're thinking. I don't think this person's going to make it with the Delta, right? So the Omicron, yes, we had a lot of people. We still had a lot of sick people. We still had a lot of people who still died. But you almost didn't feel that sense of impending doom as you did with the Delta variant. And what the experts are saying, I know I saw Dr. Fauci and I saw CDC kind of they're saying that they do not believe, at least at this time, that the severity is going to get much worse. So they don't think that the BA.2 severity is going to get much worse, but they do think a lot of people are likely going to either be reinfected or test positive for the first time. Because at this point, especially when you start getting towards the tail end of, this pandemic and this, this severe, illness kind of cycle, the fact that the people who are going to be filling the hospitals, like since really, which has been the case since the Delta variant, are going to be the unvaccinated, right? Like you're not going to be able to necessarily hide from it. Is that saying that only unvaccinated people are going to be in the hospital? Of course not, because of these newer variants that are able to replicate in people who are not vaccinated. And I don't think people realize that. Like when new variants replicate, they're able to replicate because people who are unvaccinated have no protection against it. So because these new variants occur and come around, all of a sudden, the vaccines, like let's say you only took one dose of Johnson & Johnson, or you just took the first 2 series of the Moderna or Pfizer, all of a sudden, like, you know what, you may need a booster to give that added protection, because these variants are causing a muck. Because I had a friend of mine asked me, should they get boosted, right? Like they got the 2 series, but like, is the boost enough? And I said, yeah, right. And I think the reason why is because the original vaccines were really made for the OG of COVID-19, right? The original big boy strain. But as the Delta and the Omicron and all these subsequent variants continue to kind of spin the block, right? Like as these things continue to grow and, cause a muck, all of a sudden there's mutations that like, hey, I recognize that, hey, vaccine, I recognize that you were trying to fight against this, but I got a mutation where I don't even have to worry about that no more. And again, that's the fight, right? If you're an organism like the COVID-19 virus, you're trying to live. So you're trying to do everything you can from a genetic standpoint to live. So that's why, again, I do recommend, getting boosted. And honestly, if they told me I needed a 4th booster, I'd be getting a 4th booster, right? Like, because I'm just, again, when I'm the type that I run into the fire, right? Like, oh, you have COVID patients over there, let me go over there. Or you're having COVID related symptoms, let me go over there, right? Most people are running away from this. Those situations, so they don't necessarily have to think like, oh, I'm okay, I'm going to stay away, I'm going to wear my mask. But wearing the mask is getting less and less. Again, I'm in the state of Florida. I talked about this on my Real Physician Reacts. Our governor is just a different beast, right? So here in the state of Florida, you would have thought that the pandemic been ended just because of the way government kind of played their hand. So again, what the only concern that I give, especially for my Lunch and Learn community members, is that yes, we should be thinking about the BA.2, especially if you're not vaccinated. If you're not vaccinated, again, we have another variant that's coming. It's coming. Like there's no question of if it's going to come to the United States. Again, remember I told you it went from 8 to 22% in about a month. So it's already here. So the question becomes, can I afford, right, not to protect myself in every which way possible? And I think the answer is no, right? Like I want you to live. I want you to be here next year and the year after that and the year after that. And I don't want you to have to go through significant medical turmoil because you don't want to get vaccinated. I just don't want you to do that. So again, that's just me. That's our update. If anything, drastically changes, how we'll do. We'll come back, we'll get to talking. Maybe I'll jump on the live as well too. Like I said, if we have to talk about it during Real Physician Reacts, we can do that as well, just to make sure you guys are informed and up to date. I am yours truly, Dr. Barry Pierre. I'm gonna see you guys next week.